Hi, I'm Natalie Gochnour. For as long as I can remember, during my 18 years of experience as a state economist, working for 3 different governors, and working in Washington, D.C., elected officials and business and community leaders have wanted to know what makes an economy grow. This is actually a very interesting and important question because almost everything we do in business and in government relates to growing the economy. So as economists, we ask ourselves lots of questions. What makes an economy grow? Why are some countries poor and others rich? Why do economies in some states outperform others? What role does government have in supporting economic growth? Economists begin to answer these questions by studying economies all around the world. And it's puzzling because people all around the globe face such different circumstances. Even during a recession, most Utahns, they wake up in the morning in a comfortable house or apartment, take a hot shower, eat a good breakfast, select from this large wardrobe, grab their cell phone, and they head off to work. But many of the world's 7 billion people have relatively little housing, food, or clothing. They don't have a car, they don't have cell phones, they don't have good health. Educational opportunities are few and far between. In fact, if you look at income, you see wide variations among countries. Among what I'll call high-income economies, like the U.S., Germany, Japan, gross national income per person exceeds $44,000. But in low-income economies, like Bangladesh, Kenya, Ethiopia, gross national income per person is in the $400 to $800 range. How do we explain such large differences? Well, the same thing happens to a different degree among states in our country. If we look at unemployment rates, we see that the economies in some states, like Nevada, they have nearly 1 in 10 workers unemployed. That's a serious economic problem. Right next door in Utah, the unemployment rate is less than half that amount. What causes this large difference? It sounds too simple, but actually it is simple. You see, poor countries are poor because they struggle to create value. Rich countries are rich because they produce huge amounts of value. The same thing holds true for states. High-performing states are prosperous because they create value. But how do economies create value? This is actually a really compelling question, and the answer lies in something super basic. Economic theory teaches us that for an economy to grow, a lower value input must be converted to a higher value output. It's this transformation from an input to an output that comprises value. Value comes from 2 primary sources: investment and productivity. As policymakers, you should constantly be asking these 2 questions. Number 1, are you making the right investments in human and physical capital? And number 2, are you providing the right incentives for innovation that will spur productivity? Let's consider these questions by looking at a very simple example. Suppose a young entrepreneur wants to open one of those delicious cupcake stores. The shop will use machines, mixers and ovens. The owner will hire employees, like bakers, to transform flour and sugar into really good treats. And the owner will get a loan from a bank to buy equipment, hire employees, and occupy a vacant storefront on Main Street. Suppose a week's worth of flour and sugar costs $100, and the baker is able to sell the resulting cupcakes for $500. There's $400 in value. Where does the $400 go? Some of it goes to wages, the baker, who would be unemployed without the cupcake shop. He now has a job and earns a wage. The economy grew. Some of it goes to rent. The building owner, who otherwise would have an empty storefront, now has a tenant and earns rent. Again, the economy grew. Some of it goes to interest. A local bank lent the cupcake shop money to purchase mixers and ovens. The bank helped transform a lower value input into a higher value output, and the economy grew. Finally, some of it goes toward profit. The cupcake owner keeps a bit for herself. She's created something of value and is rewarded for it. The added value from the enterprise is $400, and the value gets split between the workers, business owner, owners of assets, like the landlord, and suppliers of capital, the bank. More value means more for everyone, and a higher standard of living in our state. Now consider what happens when the business owner is taxed. After all, the business cannot succeed without police and fire protection, an educated workforce, or the transportation system that enabled products and customers to reach the business. The tax pays for a legitimate need, but it also detracts from the business owner's ability to hire more employees or purchase more capital. The tax also creates a disincentive to innovate and take risk. After all, she'll realize less profit. There's a delicate balance. As a general rule, higher taxes serve as a disincentive for growth, as do burdensome regulations. But without taxes, government cannot do the things government must do to grow the economy, like invest in infrastructure, invest in education, or incentivize research and development. So the key for policymakers is to find the right balance between optimal government services and reasonable tax and regulatory policy. Finding that balance is the art of policymaking. Going back to our cupcake example, suppose the business is going extremely well, and the owner gets an additional loan to purchase another mixer and oven. What is going to happen to output? The economy will grow. Suppose a local kid earns an associate degree in culinary arts from the community college, and the baker can now hire an additional trained worker. What's going to happen to output? The economy will grow. Suppose our shop owner carefully analyzes her business processes and discovers a better way to put frosting on each cupcake. In doing so, she fixes a production bottleneck and now can ice cupcakes more quickly. What will happen to output? The economy will grow. Now suppose state government provided an even more competitive tax and regulatory structure and provided a research and development incentive that increased productivity. What's going to happen to output? Again, the economy will grow. In every case, economic growth occurred because of investment and productivity. Government was not the key determinant of growth, far from it, but government did play a role. So the cornerstones of economic development are investment and productivity. Both the private and public sectors make a contribution. To illustrate this further, let's consider a few real-life Utah examples. In 1985, Kennecott Copper Corporation closed down, invested $400 million to modernize their facilities, and reopened a year later. Rio Tinto is now the state's leading exporter and employs approximately 2,000 Utahns. Investment created this economic growth, and without the investment, well, let's just say Kennecott Copper would not be economically viable. The mine would have closed long ago. But it's more than just investment in things. Economies also grow when you invest in people. Smart, trained, and talented people create economic value. In 1982, Adobe was co-founded by University of Utah graduate John Warnick. This pioneering software has become the world standard for publishing and is changing the world through digital experiences. Warnick was born and educated in Utah, and today the company he co-founded employs over 1,000 Utahns. Dr. Warnick is a great example of how investment in education creates economic growth. His ideas created value. And it doesn't have to be the big glamour companies. Every worker in Utah that is healthier and more educated contributes to our collective economic wealth. Basically, if we have great infrastructure and smart, healthy people, we are better able to create value. Investment motivators, like a reasonable tax and regulatory structure and stellar life quality, are also important. So do government policies matter? Absolutely. We have lots of historical examples to illustrate this point. Let's look around the world once more. At the end of the Korean War, North and South Korea shared similar situations. They were both devastated by war, possessed similar natural endowments, and tallied similar income and education levels. But the Korean War ended in 1953. Today, gross domestic product per capita in South Korea exceeds that of North Korea by a factor of 17. We can learn similar lessons by looking at East and West Germany, or even China today, as it has been more accepting of market forces. What can we learn from these examples? Number one, markets work. And number two, governments play a vitally important role in defining the rules of the game for workers and firms and motivating investment. Now let's look at productivity. Productivity is the rate at which we transform inputs into outputs. What makes an economy more productive? Technology is key. Technology creates faster and better ways to transform lower value inputs into higher value outputs. More often than not, technology occurs because of innovation. So innovation is incredibly important. A great example of the value of technology and innovation is Utah's medical device industry. In 1982, a team of U of U researchers, engineers, and clinicians implanted the Jarvik 7 artificial heart. Utah also developed the first functional prosthetic arm and the first successful heart pump implant. Today, the innovation continues with more than 600 life science companies in Utah that employ over 26,800 people. Companies like Bard Access Systems, BD Medical, Boston Scientific, GE Healthcare, Merit Medical, and Nelson Labs innovate, produce, and create value for the Utah economy. Another important aspect of productivity is incentives. There's an old adage that you can boil down all of economics to 4 words. People respond to incentives. The rest is just color commentary. Well, it's largely true. Economies are more efficient if they provide the right incentives for people to produce output. Government must be extremely careful to properly place incentives. To sum it up, as a policymaker, it's important for you to pay close attention to the 2 drivers of economic growth, investment and productivity. Consider how your actions impact these drivers. Pay attention to the motivators of investment, things like the tax and regulatory environment and quality of life. Make sure government properly places incentives to reward innovation and spur productivity. All of these components really matter. Utah leaders have a long history of making great decisions. And it's not just about a hypothetical and oversimplified cupcake store. It's about real Utahns who want so badly to live a full life, a life full of opportunity for themselves and their children. I'm Natalie Gochnour. Thanks for listening.